First, faith in diaspora preserves culture. Second, faith resists oppression. And third, faith negotiates identity. But these are never static. They shift with generation, gender, and context. For one person, church is a refuge. For another, it's a battlefield. For a third person, it's a bridge. My task has been to open the space, and now I'd love to hear your voices. And I have a number of questions for you all. Ma'alolele, Nisa Pulaminaka, Talofalawa, and warm Pacific greetings to you all. Video I'm going to share with you a talanoa about the topic Pacific Diaspora, expressions of identity, cultural preservation, and resistance. And my focus will be mainly on the faith and religiosity aspect regarding this topic. But before we get into it, I begin by acknowledging the ancestors of this land, Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Mana Whenua, Tangata Whenua, and also the ancestors of Pacifica who carried their stories, faith, and identities across Moana, so that I can be able to hear today recording this video, and you will also be able, especially my Pacific families and friends, to be able to watch this video. And I also like to acknowledge for those of you who are watching this video, if this is your first time, I warmly welcome you to the channel. And for those of you who have been following my channel and watching my videos, I also welcome you once again. So for those of you who are watching, you are not only receiving knowledge from this video, but you are also shaping the future of Pacific culture, of Pacific faith, and also Pacific knowledge and scholarship. Let me provide you a bit of background about myself to help you understand the context that I'm coming from with this topic, and also to enable yourself to be able to see yourself where you fit in this topic and how your context, your culture, your faith, your experience has also shaped your identity and what you are and where you are today. My name is Dr. Laiseni Fanon Charisma Liava, but please just call me Seni. I was born and nurtured in Tonga, and now I live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with my wife and children. Before I entered church ministry or academia, I actually began my career as a naval officer in Tonga. That experience taught me discipline, it taught me service and the importance of leadership under pressure. From there, my journey moved through many different pathways. I worked in the public sector, the private sector, and within civil society organizations in Tonga that focused on community development, social transformation. Each of those environments shaped how I understand responsibility, how I understand teamwork, and the human spirit. For more than 20 years, I have devoted my life primarily to church ministry, education, and research. Those 2 decades took me across pulpits. It took me classrooms and communities throughout the Pacific and here in Aotearoa. I have served as a priest within the Anglican Church, a lecturer, a mentor, and a community advocate. Over time, my work has stretched across theology, ethics, and social justice, within a particular focus on environmental stewardship, gender equality, and LGBTQIA+ inclusion. These aren't just academic topics for me, but rather they are lived commitments born from working with people whose stories, whose struggles, and hopes reflect the face of God, our Creator, in many forms. My journey has taught me that faith is not confined to one role or one institution. Whether you are at sea, in a government office, in a church, or in a university, the same calling keeps whispering: to serve, to love, and to help others see their own light. So I share this background not only to elevate myself, but to remind us, and for those of you who are watching, that our careers, our callings, and our spirituality can take many shapes. They all weave together into one story, a story about learning, a story about serving, and constantly rediscovering what it means to be human. My role today is not to give you all the answers, but to create space in your mind to think differently, to question what you have received from society, what you have received from institutions, even from your own families. Because truth, especially in diaspora, is never simple. It is negotiated, it is contested, and it is lived. So I would like to ask you this question. What do faith and culture preserve, and what do they resist? And I want you to keep this question in your mind as we navigate this Lexavaka together. Faith and religiosity for Pacific peoples is rarely a private matter. It's about community, it's about cultural memory, and finding belonging in societies that sometimes misread or marginalize us. Think of a Tongan, Samoan, or Fijian congregations in South Auckland. What about the Tokelauan Fellowship in Porirua or the Cook Islands Church in Sydney? These churches are more than churches. They are community hubs, they are language schools, they are welfare networks and spiritual homes. Diaspora faith communities are never neutral. They preserve culture, they resist oppression, and they negotiate identity all at once. A single Sunday service can include hymn singing in heritage languages, youth dancing to contemporary gospel hip hop, and a sermon referencing both the Bible and migration struggles. That dynamic tension is what we will unpack today through this video. Let me share a little bit about this scholar, Lautua, who argues that images of God are cultural. They are never universal. A Samoan may imagine God as a Matai, a chief, a Fijian as a Turanganivanua, protector of land and people, and a Tongan as Otua Ofa, God of love. Each image reveals how faith and culture mirror each other. Second, Lautua reminds us that faith, identity, and well-being are inseparable. When a Pacific person feels distant from their culture or church, their mental well-being can suffer. When those ties are reconnected through prayer, through talanoa or cultural gatherings, hope and wholeness often return. And I have seen this in many young people who regain confidence throughout my ministry by simply leading a hymn in their mother tongue. Third, Lautua calls for a Pacific qualitative methodology, research that is relational, communal, spiritual, transformative, and this isn't research done on Pacific peoples, but with and for them, through Talanoa, through honoring La or the relational spaces, through spirituality itself. Imagine interviewing elders about image of God, but doing so over shared food with prayer and story, not just a record. And that is the spirit of Lautua's approach. So what image of God did you inherit, and who gave it to you? What cultural values sit within that image? If that image sustains you, why? If it hurts you, why? We will now turn to Pacific diaspora expressions of faith, and we will talk about three main points. The first one, faith is cultural preservation. Second, faith as resistance. And third, faith as identity negotiation. Let's start with the first one, faith as cultural preservation. In diaspora, churches often become cultural sanctuaries. Inside their walls, language, hymns, rituals, and values like whakababa, respect, and alofa, love, are kept alive. The Tongan Methodist Church in Auckland, for instance, runs youth choirs that teach harmony and humility, not just music. Cook Islands congregations hold ora and pe'e performances after worship, preserving oral tradition. But here is the tension. Is this preservation or is it fossilization? Are we keeping culture alive or are we freezing it in the form it was when our parents migrated? That's a question we must wrestle with. When we say preservation, we usually mean keeping something alive, nurturing it, so that it continues to grow, continues to breathe and speak into new contexts. But fossilization happens when we hold on so tightly to the past that the culture stops evolving. It becomes like a fossil, a beautiful imprint of what once was, but no longer living. It might look authentic, but it has lost movement. In some Tongan or Samoan churches here in Aotearoa, services are conducted exactly as they were in the 1960s back home. The same hymns they're still singing, the same order, the same gender roles. And for those elders, this can be comforting because it recreates home, although they are already left from the islands and now they are here either in New Zealand, Australia, or the USA. It feels like home by bringing those memories. But for young people born here, like here in New Zealand, it can feel like a museum, though it's sacred, yet distant from their lived realities. That's when preservation risks turning into fossilization. Imagine a young group wanting to perform a spoken word piece about climate change, mental health, or migration, topics that matter deeply to them. And elders reject it as not traditional or not relevant enough. That moment shows fossilization, which is cultural, which is culture frozen in time and unable to respond to the present. But if the same youth group translate an old hymn into both English and Tongan, adds rhythm from hip hop, and still sings about God's love, that is preservation. It is the same heartbeat, but new music. The form changes, but the spirit remains. So we might say preservation keeps the spirit alive, while fossilization keeps only the form. Preservation adapts to new contexts, while fossilization refuses to change. Preservation welcomes new generations, but fossilization excludes and alienates them. Preservation is dynamic and creative, but fossilization is static and nostalgic. So our challenge is to find balance, to honor what our ancestors handed down without turning it into a museum piece. How do we keep our culture and faith breathing, moving, and relevant in our children's world? Second, faith as resistance. Faith has long been a site of resistance for Pacific peoples. While missionaries arrived in the 19th century carrying the tools of colonization, new religions, new laws, new hierarchies, our ancestors did not simply receive these passively. They reinterpreted them. They translated the gospel through their own cultures, turning what was meant to control them into a language of empowerment and liberation. For example, in Samoa, the Mao movement in the early 20th century drew heavily on Christian ideas of justice and peace to challenge colonial rule. The cry Samoa mo Samoa, which means Samoa for Samoans, was not only political, but deeply spiritual. It was a statement that calls justice includes the right of a people to self-determination. Across the region, faith communities became arenas of resistance. In Fiji, church leaders were central to anti-colonial education movements. In Tonga, the Free Wesleyan Church became a space where the sacred and political overlapped. And in the 1960s, Pacific independence churches rose up to reclaim authority over theology, language, and leadership. They said, we can interpret code for ourselves, and that is resistance. In the diaspora, the same spirit continues, but the battlegrounds look different. Instead of colonial governments, today's struggles often involve racism, economic inequity, and climate injustice. Pacific churches in Aotearoa have organized marches for climate justice, reminding New Zealanders that rising sea levels are not just environmental issues, they are moral and spiritual issues. Our people stand at the front line of the world's crisis, and faith gives them both voice and courage. You see this in Auckland and Wellington, where Pacific ministers partner with secular groups to support fair immigration policies, workers' rights, and housing justice. During the Torn Raids apology in 2021, many Pacific clergy stood shoulder to shoulder with activists, victims, and families. Their pulpits became platforms of justice, proclaiming repentance not just as a personal act, but as a social transformation. That is faith in action. Here lies the paradox. The same institutions that resist external oppression can sometimes replicate internal oppression. Some churches still silence women's voices in leadership, exclude LGBTQIA plus members, or ignore the suffering of those who don't fit traditional roles. The same Bible that once empowered the oppressed can, when interpreted narrowly, become a tool of exclusion. And that is the uncomfortable truth. So we must ask honestly, when does faith liberate and when does it confine? Does our theology build bridges or boundaries? When a church preaches love but refuses to bless certain people's love, is that still resistance or is it control? Faith as resistance, then, is not only about fighting colonial powers or government systems. It's also about resisting the injustices within ourselves and our own communities. True resistance is ongoing. It evolves with every generation that dares to ask new questions about freedom, equality, and love. Third, faith as identity negotiation. The third lens is faith as identity negotiation, where faith becomes a living dialogue between our inherited traditions and the world we now inhabit. In diaspora, identity is never singular, it is hybrid, blending Pacific heritage, Western influence, and global culture. It's not about losing one identity for another, but about weaving them together into something new and alive. In many ways, our Pacific youth embody this negotiation every day. A Samoan young man might rap scripture verses on TikTok, merging gospel with hip hop beats, a form of modern day psalms that speak to struggle and hope. A Tongan environmental activist might begin a climate rally with a prayer and hymn, invoking ancestors and the Creator in the same breath. A Fijian Indian Christian might blend Hindu reverence for ancestors within Christian prayer, seeing no contradiction in honoring both the lineage of faith and the lineage of blood. Are not just modern adaptations, they are acts of cultural creativity and theological courage. They show that faith is not fixed to time or place. It's a living conversation between worlds. Our youth are building bridges between Lotu, faith, and Oranga, life, between the pulpit and the platform, between the cross and the climate march. This is what post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha calls the third space, the in-between space where new meanings are born. It's a space where Pacific people in diaspora can be fully themselves without having to choose between being traditional or modern. It's where a young Niuean woman can wear a kahuhuruhuru to church and then preach about gender justice in her sermon. It's where a queer Tongan poet can invoke both the Bible and Whakaliti heritage to proclaim Koslao as inclusive. It's where digital platforms become new altars, where memes, spoken word, and live streams carry the same spiritual energy that once filled village churches. So, what counts as religiosity today? Is faith only what happens in church on Sunday morning? Or can it also be what happens on the street, what happens online, or at the protest line? Can environmental activism, gender equality, and cultural pride be forms of sacred expression? Many Pacific, many Pacific youth would say yes, but they find God not only in scripture, but in solidarity, not in ritual, but in justice. But I would like to remind you, this negotiation is not easy. It involves tension between generations, between values, between belonging and becoming. But that tension is fertile. It's the soil in which new forms of spirituality grow. When faith is allowed to breathe in that hybrid space, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes both ancient and new, both deeply Pacific and boldly global. So when we speak of identity negotiation, we are really talking about transformation, about Pacific people who dare to hold tradition and innovation together without apology. That is, that as well is faith. We share some of my own personal journey and how it relates to the topic. For many years, I served as a priest. I wore the collar, I preached the word, I cared for congregations across the island and here in Aotearoa. Ministry was my home. It was my calling. But over time, I began to see cracks, not in my faith, but in the systems surrounding it. Structures that were meant to serve love began to safeguard hierarchy. Spaces that once nurtured life began to silence voices, especially those of women, youth, and LGBTQIA plus members. Eventually, I reached a crossroads. My heart told me that faith must breathe freely, that the spirit cannot be contained by walls. It cannot be contained by titles or robes. So I stepped away from institutional ministry. That decision was both an example of preservation and resistance. Preservation, on one hand, because I never stopped following the spirit. Resistance, on the other hand, because I refused to stay inside systems that no longer reflected the compassion and truth I believed God called us to live. When I left the pulpit, I thought I was walking away from ministry, but I soon realized ministry never left me. It simply changed shape. I still minister, just differently. I now serve for research, teaching, and community work. When I sit with Pacific families struggle with financial hardships, domestic violence, alcohol and drug harm, or design programs for mental well-being, or mentor young leaders, that as well is sacred work. When I listen to the pain of a young person or someone from the rainbow communities who feel unwelcome in their own church or faith community because of their gender or identity, and I tell them, you are already loved, you are already enough, and you already belong. That as well is ministry. When I stand alongside Pacific communities fighting for climate justice, for fair pay, or for visibility in the health system. That too is ministry. I no longer stand behind a pulpit, but I still stand for the same code of love, justice, and truth. This is what I mean when I say faith is both preservation and resistance. It preserves the spirit of love, hope, and compassion, and it resists any system that denies them. Sometimes resistance means speaking truth to power. Other times it means quietly walking away and creating something new. And that is what I've been doing, creating a new path. Faith is not about obedience to institutions. It's about alignment with spirit. It's about being true to yourself, being true to others, and live your life authentically as you are and will become. I want to ask you, if faith can exist outside of the walls of the church, where do you locate your own faith? Who defines what faith looks like for you in diaspora? Is it your family? Is it your church or your lived experience? And who benefits from those definitions? Because every generation has to redefine faith for itself. Our ancestors translated Christianity into Pacific languages and customs. We in diaspora must now translate it into the language of our lives here, in our classrooms, our art, our activism, our relationships. That's how faith stays alive. So to summarize, first, faith in diaspora preserves culture. Second, faith resists oppression. And third, faith negotiates identity. But these are never static. They shift with generation, gender, and context. For one person, church is a refuge. For another, it's a battlefield. For a third person, it's a bridge. My task has been to open the space, and now I'd love to hear your voices. And I have a number of questions for you all. First, which images of God shaped your identity and how? Second, can mental well-being be separated from spirituality in Pacific communities? Third, when does faith preserve culture and when does it limit it? Four, is activism or cultural pride also a sacred expression of faith? And lastly, how do elders and youth differ in their expressions of faith in diaspora? So I'd like to invite you, please share your thoughts, share your views, comment in the comment section of this video. And I'm open to receive and we can dialogue with these questions. As we close on this video, return to our guiding questions in the beginning. What do faith and culture preserve and what do they resist? I hope you leave not with easy answers, but with deeper curiosity. Your role as Pacific people, as Pacific scholars, and for those of you who are watching this video, is to think critically, do your own research, and to discover truth for yourself. Faith in diaspora is not static. It's alive, it's contested, and creative. It can be sung, faith can be danced, faith can be spoken or lived through activism. Each of you contributes to that evolving story. If you'd like to explore these ideas more deeply, I recommend some readings for you. And I'm going to leave a list of readings for you who are interested to do further research about our topic today and for what I've been shared with you. These readings will help you understand how faith, identity, and resistance are being reimagined in Pacific cultures, in Pacific faith, and in Pacific scholarship. Remember, theology and culture are never separate from life. They are based and dependent on how we live, how we think, and how we transform our world. Mahalo au pito, winaka bakalebu, papitai te lawa. And thank you for sharing this talanoa with me today. I wish you all the best and I'm more than happy to see you again in my next video.